Paul's final letter, written from a Roman dungeon, chains on his wrist, execution imminent. This is farewell, a father passing the torch to his son in the faith. This is Seek, Go, Create. You're listening to Read the New Testament in 90 days, 27 books, in order, in context. We're walking through the New Testament the way it was written so you can hear it the way the first churches did. Make sure that you're following along with all of the information, with all of the resources at k2m.foundation/NT90. That is the hub for this reading plan, and all the background information, all the links, everything you need is right there. k2m.foundation/NT90. Today we are getting close, folks. Today's stop is 2 Timothy, Paul's final letter, a farewell from death row. And I got to tell you, these last few books of the New Testament, 2 Timothy, Revelation, and then our wrap-up conclusion will have a lot of historical context so that we can really know all that's going on as the New Testament begins wrapping up, so that we could really immerse ourselves in the audience that is getting this information the first time. So this one might be a little bit longer. Revelation might be longer, but a lot of great info. The author, we know it's Paul, and the date is AD 67, which is the late 60s of the first century. The audience is Timothy, and he is located in Ephesus. We are confident that Paul is writing this, we believe, from Rome. The setting, it's 37 years past the resurrection. Paul is in a Roman dungeon, not a house arrest from the early 60s where he wrote some of his letters from. This is hardcore prison. Execution is imminent. He says that himself within the letter. All right, we got a lot of historical context here, so let's try to get to as much of this as we can. In Rome, Nero has left for Greece to perform in games and theater. Yes, he's going to be playing in games and performing in theater. Oddly enough, this is historical. He wins them all. No one will defeat the emperor, of course. Rome is governed while he's away by a brutal freedman. The emperor who burned believers as torches is literally singing on a stage in Greece. Within a year, Nero will be dead, but Paul will face the sword first. In Jerusalem, the temple is still intact, but the end is in motion. The end of the age, the end times are in motion right now. Vespasian is the leader of 3 Roman legions, and he is in Judea crushing the revolt that started about a year before. The march toward Jerusalem has begun. It's less than 3 years before the temple and Jerusalem will be destroyed by Roman troops. This is the end of the age. This is the generation that Jesus spoke about in Matthew 24. Paul warns of difficult times in the last days in chapter 3, verse 1. He's not describing a distant future. Jerusalem will fall in less than 3 years. The old covenant age is being judged, and it's ending. The crown of righteousness awaits those who love Christ's appearing, the coming of Christ, the revealing of Christ. And he talks about that in chapter 4, verse 8. Let's look at the church itself. We've repeated this multiple times, but it's worth saying again. James has been executed. Peter is gone. Paul is about to die. Of the founding generation, only John remains. One generation witnessed it all, and they wrote it down for us. That was what this New Testament was all about, documenting that unique time frame. The tension that's going on, this isn't house arrest that Paul is under. This is a dungeon. Paul was likely, we don't know this exactly, we're speculating some, but he was likely rearrested during Nero's crackdown after the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64, just a few years before this letter was written. Tradition places him in the Mamertine prison, a dungeon near the Roman Forum for high-profile prisoners awaiting execution. He's in chains. We know that in chapter 1, verse 16, and chapter 2, verse 9. He's cold. We know that in chapter 4, verse 13, because he asks for his cloak. And he's abandoned by many. We see that in chapter 4, verse 16. Onesiphorus, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Onesiphorus searched hard to find him in chapter 1, verse 17, but Paul was difficult to locate, isolated, cut off. That is a contrast to his imprisonment in the early 60s when he was essentially under house arrest and he seemed to be teaching and preaching and taking visitors the entire time. This is not the same imprisonment. Paul's death, Roman citizens weren't crucified. They were beheaded, and we know that Paul was a Roman citizen. Tradition places Paul's execution on the Ostian Way outside Rome in roughly AD 67, late 67, or early 68, which will be just a few months within the writing of this letter. He will kneel before the sword. Next year, in 68, John will see a vision on Patmos, the fall of the harlot city, the vindication of the martyrs, and the victory of the Lamb. The audience that this is written to, it is Timothy, Paul's beloved child in the faith. He's leading the church in Ephesus. It's roughly 1,400 miles from Rome. Travel took 4 to 6 weeks under good conditions by sea and then overland via the Appian Way. But in winter, the sea shut down. Paul pleads in chapter 4, verse 21, "Do your best to come to me before winter." Paul is pleading for Timothy to come see him, knowing probably that they will never see each other again if they're able to see each other that time. If Timothy didn't leave soon, he wouldn't make it until spring, and Paul might not be there by spring. We do not know if Timothy arrived in time. He may have received this letter while Paul still lived or after the sword had fallen. Either way, in this letter, he is reading the final words of the man who shaped his ministry and truthfully his life. Why now? Paul is writing one final letter to Timothy, not instruction like 1 Timothy, but a farewell. What you're going to encounter in this letter. 2 Timothy is urgent and tender at the same time, a dying man's charge. You'll hear about fan into flame, the gift God gave you through the laying on of hands. God didn't give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-control or sound mind. Don't be ashamed of the testimony or of Paul in chains. That implies that many abandoned Paul while he was in chains in this situation. Guard the deposit. We've heard that before. Guard the gospel that has been entrusted to you. Entrust yourself to faithful people who will teach others also. He talks about the last days, difficult times, lovers of self, lovers of pleasure, but continue in what you've learned. Preach the word in season and out of season. Endure suffering. Do the work of an evangelist. Ironic that this is coming from someone who's in a dungeon awaiting their death. Finally, he says, I have fought the good fight, finished the race, kept the faith. The crown of righteousness awaits. The torch is passed. Now, you're going to be reading 2 Timothy over 2 sessions. Enjoy this letter. Immerse yourself in this letter. This final letter that we know was from the man that wrote most of the New Testament, from Paul. Put yourself in the shoes of Timothy, who is reading this final letter from his mentor, the person that shaped his life. So anyway, read that. In the next episode, we're going to be wrapping up with Revelation, the revealing of Christ. John's apocalyptic vision written just before the end. Jesus, the reigning Lamb, Babylon falling, and the call to be a faithful witness under the empire. Those are the messages we'll hear next time in Revelation. Make sure again that you're following along at k2m.foundation/NT90. Get some great information there. Now, before we read 2 Timothy, picture this. It's late summer, AD 67. Paul sits in a dungeon near the Roman Forum. Chains, stone walls, cold and dank, isolation. He knows what's coming. Roman citizens aren't crucified, they're beheaded. The sword is waiting. But Paul isn't afraid. Remember Jesus Christ, risen from the dead. That's the gospel. That's why the sword doesn't have the last word. There's one more letter to write to Timothy, his son in the faith, 1,400 miles away in Ephesus. Come before winter. If Timothy doesn't leave soon, the sea will close, and Paul may not be here by spring. This won't be instruction. This is farewell, a father passing the torch. Now, let's read.